The scream echoed a second before the shot. It wasn't the sound of someone being hit, but of someone about to lose control of the situation. The girl, just 18, still had her finger on the trigger when she saw the terrorist twist and drop sideways, his right shoulder bursting open like a black flower. He writhed on the ground, screaming words in a language she didn't understand, but the meaning was crystal clear. The two remaining men immediately ducked behind the rocks and zigzagged their way to a new hiding spot, one that gave no clear line of fire. The three kneeling soldiers who were still alive looked at each other as if waking from a nightmare cut short. But they were handcuffed, unarmed, frozen, and still very much in danger. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that doesn't bring peace, but a new kind of tension. Because now, the tables had turned. The targets were on high alert, and any mistake from here on out wouldn't be fixed in time. 50 seconds before that shot, the girl was still adjusting her scope with a smirk, thinking the day would be just another trek through the woods with her grandfather. They'd done this dozens of times before. It was a kind of family ritual, taking out the old Jeep, looking for tracks, racing to see who would spot the first target. What made this morning different was the strange silence hanging over the valley. Not even the planes overhead seemed to hum at their usual pitch. When she mounted the rifle on the wooden stand fixed to the vehicle and began scanning the slope, her stomach dropped. 3 men in uniform, handcuffed, kneeling, heads down, and 5 figures with weapons in hand, one of them already aiming to fire. She didn't have to say a word. Her grandfather crouched beside her, peered through the auxiliary scope and gave a quiet, "Got it." Then, without another word, he began counting down to the shot. The first shot was his. Precise. Nearly impossible. 2 targets lined up and dropped with a single, dry crack, drowned by the noise of a crop duster passing in the background. Every detail was calculated to the millimeter. It was as if the roar of the engine had been designed to cover the sound of that exact bullet. The girl, even with adrenaline burning through her veins, didn't hesitate. She knew she wasn't on her grandfather's level, but she knew that rifle, and she knew that terrain. She took a breath, steadied her hands, and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit high, at the shoulder, but it was enough. The terrorist lost his weapon before he could pull the trigger. 1 second later, and the soldiers would have been dead. 1 second earlier, and she might have missed entirely. But she didn't, and now, everything depended on what they'd do next. Her grandfather looked at her with a serious glint in his eyes. It wasn't pride. It was something more urgent. A silent understanding between people who've watched the world fall apart because someone hesitated. He moved to the side of the Jeep and began disassembling the second weapon, a lighter model, perfect for fast movement. "They're going to fight back. We need to move before reinforcements arrive." The girl nodded. Her chest felt tight, but her hands were steady now. The terrorist's blood still dripped within her sights, and she couldn't shake the image. She knew what she'd done. She knew that man would die. And she knew time was now their invisible enemy. If you're into stories about real heroes, men and women who inspire through silent acts and genuine courage, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And don't forget to drop a comment with your honest thoughts or suggestions. It really helps us keep improving every video. Let's keep going. The trail was steep, unstable, and covered with low brush that made every step a struggle. But the veteran moved like he was walking across his own skin. He descended with precision, barely making a sound, while the girl followed behind, her legs feeling heavier than usual. The lightweight rifle swung against her back, but what truly weighed her down was something else. The muffled sound of the wounded man dragging himself across the ground. Even from nearly a kilometer away, she could still hear, or maybe just imagine, the groans, the sobs, the echo of her own shot. Her grandfather didn't say a word. He wasn't the type to explain things with speeches. He taught with his gaze, with the steadiness of his movements, with the way he doubled his focus at every obstacle. On that descent, there was no room for regret, doubt, or ego. There was only the mission. They stopped at a rocky formation about 300 meters above the hostage site. The veteran crouched and raised his binoculars. The girl followed, aligning her scope. The wounded terrorist was slumped against a rock, head down, his right arm limp like it was hanging by a thread. Blood trickled to the ground, forming a thick trail that shimmered under the morning sun. He was trembling, trying to speak to the others, but the words came out weak. The two remaining men were in defensive positions, scanning the landscape with tense eyes, still unaware of where the shots had come from. That was all they had now: surprise. And that's a currency you can only spend once. The veteran whispered, "You cover the one on the left. If I move around the side, I'll have an angle on the other." She nodded, but then hesitated. What if he still reacts? The injured one. Her grandfather looked at her. His blue eyes were calm, but unwavering. He won't. That was the first time she realized that kind of certainty didn't come from coldness, but from experience. The kind earned by seeing the human body fail before the mind gives up. What he meant was clear. That man was already done, not because of another bullet, but because of time, blood loss, the inevitable math of collapse. She positioned herself, resting the lightweight rifle on a rock, aiming through branches and shadows. The terrorist on the left was crouched low, peeking between rusted barrels. He looked nervous, shaky hands, a broken radio tossed beside him. He was shouting, but no one was answering. The execution had been interrupted, and their entire structure was starting to fall apart. The other one, further back, circled the soldiers in tight loops, pointing his weapon at nothing, as if any second he might act out of desperation. The girl held her breath, finger on the trigger, waiting. She remembered her grandfather's words. "You don't shoot to impress. You shoot when you're sure it'll stop something worse." But it was the sound that made her pause. One of the soldiers, still kneeling, started to speak, quietly, with effort. He was praying. The voice barely carried, but the words came one by one, pushed forward by sheer fear, and it struck something deep inside her. She squinted, refocused. The terrorist on the left moved, too fast, but not fast enough. Her shot cracked. Didn't hit the chest, got the leg. It was enough to bring him down. He fell hard, dropping the rifle. But now, the last one had seen, and he turned toward the noise. The veteran was already on the flank. The last terrorist raised his weapon, aiming directly at the girl, who was still trying to realign her scope. But before he could squeeze the trigger, a muffled shot rang through the valley. A clean hit, from the side. The man collapsed backwards, the rifle still slung over his shoulder. Silence returned. This time, the silence of an ending, of relief, but not of rest. The girl scanned the trees, searching for her grandfather, when she noticed the wounded man near the rock. He wasn't screaming anymore. He wasn't moving at all. The soldiers were still handcuffed. And now, time started ticking again, but for a different reason. Because in that silent valley, someone was getting closer. The sound came from the last place they expected, behind them. A muffled metallic noise, like something being dragged quickly across the side of a vehicle. The girl spun instinctively, rifle at the ready, eyes still trying to pinpoint the direction. Her grandfather was already back in his elevated position, breathing steady, as if he'd known all along there was a second act to this story. "Someone else is in the area," he muttered through the radio, never taking his eye off the scope. "And they're not reinforcements." The valley, once under control, now seemed to breathe differently. The tension wasn't over. It had simply changed form. The girl crawled toward a rise covered in shrubs, sheltering herself beneath dry branches and shadows cast by the clouds. That's when she saw it. A dark, unmarked utility vehicle creeping along a parallel trail, about 500 meters above where the soldiers were still kneeling. The car stopped. 2 doors opened. Out stepped 2 men dressed in dark gear, helmets on, carrying equipment that clearly didn't match the ragtag setup of the kidnappers. These guys were professionals, high-grade gear, communicating silently with hand signals. They weren't looking at the soldiers. They were focused on the bodies. One of them crouched down and started searching what was left of one of the terrorists. "They're not cops," her grandfather said flatly, still watching. "They're either retrieving something or covering something up." The girl swallowed hard. What do we do? She knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but he didn't respond right away. He just kept watching, the way someone does when they know every question has a cost. One of the men found something. It looked like a device or maybe a small folder. He tucked it into his vest, gave a hand signal, and both men returned to the vehicle. It was obvious. They were running a separate mission, and they knew exactly what they were doing. The vehicle turned around and disappeared into the trees like it had never been there. When the valley fell silent again, the girl exhaled slowly. The soldiers were still handcuffed, visibly drained. Her grandfather gave a quick hand signal. "Let's move." They zigzagged down the slope, alert, scanning every inch of the terrain. As they drew closer, the soldiers looked up, disbelief on their faces. The girl went straight to work, kneeling to unlock the first set of cuffs. One of the men started to cry. Another could only stammer, "Thank you," over and over. But the third, the one who had prayed, looked her straight in the eye and asked, "You were the one who shot first, weren't you?" She nodded silently. "I felt it," he said, "like something pulled me back. A second before the end." The girl felt something tighten inside her chest. It wasn't pride. It was responsibility, the kind that doesn't fade after the shot is fired. Up ahead, her grandfather was inspecting the bodies, confirming there were no more threats. But something about the wounded terrorist caught his attention. He was still now, eyes open but unfocused. The veteran knelt beside him and checked his pulse with a light touch. Nothing. The dried blood around his shoulder revealed he'd lasted longer than he should have. He died slowly. No reaction, no second shot, no glory. That's when he found something unusual. The man carried a long-range military radio, but it was powered off. Beside it, a laminated card with a foreign seal, one that didn't belong to any known organization. The veteran slipped both items into his backpack without a word. As he stood up, he glanced toward the trail where the vehicle had vanished. His eyes narrowed for a moment, as if memorizing something no one else could see. On the way down to the improvised extraction point, the girl walked beside him in silence. The freed soldiers were being escorted by both of them. The air was thick with gratitude, but also confusion. This hadn't just been a hostage situation. It was something bigger, something that wouldn't fit in a headline. And as they made their way down in single file, the sound of a helicopter finally broke through the sky above the valley. But they knew. It was already too late for questions. The girl quickened her pace and turned to her grandfather. "Do you think they'll want to know who fired the first shot?" He gave a faint smile without looking back. "They will." But the answer already left with the wind. And there was one more thing neither the helicopter nor the soldiers knew. The mission wasn't over. It was only going deeper. The military helicopter touched down slowly, kicking up spirals of dust that clouded the ground and blurred the first few steps of the soldiers stepping off the aircraft. They were from the Federal Reserve. Tactical uniforms, standard-issue weapons, but tense faces. Clearly, they hadn't expected to find the soldiers alive. A younger officer, earpiece in place and tablet in hand, rushed over. "Who carried out the neutralization?" he asked bluntly. The veteran simply lifted his chin in the girl's direction. Her hair was tied back hastily, and the aim still lingered in her eyes, but she said nothing. The officer looked at her, then at the grandfather, and finally at the three soldiers, now being treated by medics. The silence said more than any answer. He didn't press further. A little farther away, near the jeep, the veteran opened his backpack and pulled out the radio and the laminated card he had recovered. He studied the symbol in the corner. It wasn't military, and it wasn't governmental. The writing wasn't American, maybe Eastern European, or something even more obscure. He knew turning it in would trigger questions no one could truly answer. But he also knew holding onto it would be a burden. The girl walked up quietly. "You think they were here for more than just the soldiers?" He nodded, eyes still on the symbol. "Yeah, but we don't have the full picture. Not yet." Just then, one of the rescued soldiers approached, the one who had been praying. His voice was still rough. "I don't know who you people are, but you weren't there by chance." The veteran raised his eyes. "No one ever is." The soldier pulled a small pendant from his pocket, a medal that had slipped from his uniform. "A sergeant gave this to me during a mission in Iraq, told me only to pass it on to someone who'd truly saved a life." He held it out to the girl. "It's yours now." She hesitated, looked at her grandfather. He gave her a nod. She took the medal and slid it into her pocket. It wasn't about recognition. It was about meaning. Hours later, far from the valley, the jeep moved slowly along a dirt road. The sky had started to shift. deep blues melting into streaks of orange as the sun prepared to dip behind the mountains. The girl was driving. Her grandfather sat in the passenger seat, quiet, watching the world like someone reading between the lines. After a few minutes, she spoke. "I still see his face, the one I hit." The answer came without urgency. "And you will, for a while. Not because you did anything wrong, but because it matters to you." She nodded, eyes locked on the road. "I didn't know it felt so different when it's real." He smiled. "That's why training sharpens your aim, but it never prepares your soul." The Jeep's radio crackled faintly, a local frequency. News about the soldiers' rescue was already circulating, but there was no mention of the two who made it happen. No names, no faces, just speculation. The reporter said, "Military sources are still investigating the swift and precise action that prevented the execution." The girl turned off the radio. "You think they'll ever figure out who we are?" He shrugged. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what they do with what they've been given." She glanced at him. "And what do we do now?" The veteran reached into the glove box and pulled out a folded map. He tapped a spot to the north. "There's a trail I want to show you, high up in the ridgeline. Strong winds, clear visibility, perfect for testing long-distance shots." The girl smiled. Not because of the challenge, but because of what it meant. Because now, she knew she wasn't just learning how to shoot. She was learning what it meant to carry a shot in memory. And more than that, she was learning how to shoot and still remain human. But before she could respond, the phone buzzed on the dashboard. A message from an unknown number. "Warning. You weren't the only ones watching. Be careful with your next steps." She showed it to her grandfather. He read it, then simply said, "Looks like training isn't over yet." The road ended at an old wooden fence, split down the middle by time and storms. Beyond it, a dry, open field stretched toward distant rock formations, and at the top of a ridge, the silhouette of an abandoned watchtower. The girl parked the Jeep without saying a word. Her grandfather was already scanning the terrain carefully. This was an observation point back during the '87 training exercises. Nobody comes out here anymore. He stepped out first, adjusting the rifle on his back. She followed, though her eyes remained fixed on the message still on her phone screen. She read it again, word for word. The weight wasn't in the warning, but in the fact that someone knew. Someone had been watching, and more than that, someone didn't want this to continue. From up high, binoculars resting on the cracked concrete edge of the tower, she could see it all. The valley where the soldiers were rescued, the trail where the mysterious vehicle disappeared, and farther out, a dark line cutting through the vegetation, like something had burned a path straight through. Her grandfather pointed. "There. That's where they tried to reach out with the radio we found. No one responded, but the antenna was facing that direction." She took mental note. Now it wasn't just about aiming. It was about investigating, understanding. She was on a different kind of mission now. Later, back in the Jeep, she unfolded the laminated letter. The characters on the front were in an alphabet she didn't recognize, but on the back, scribbled in English, was a single sentence. "The target is bigger than it seems, and you interfered." She turned to her grandfather. "Why would they leave that with one of the men?" He shrugged. "Either they left it on purpose, or they were certain they wouldn't be stopped." Silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because they both understood this had only been the beginning. This was the part no one talks about in training, the after. The part where your conscience weighs more than the rifle, and the world, though briefly saved, remains a dangerous place. The girl looked out at the horizon. "You always knew this could happen, didn't you?" Her grandfather took a deep breath. "Always. But you only really understand when it happens to someone you love." She didn't respond, just nodded, because now she knew it too. Weeks later, an article surfaced in a small national defense magazine. It speculated about an anonymous intervention in the rescue of the kidnapped soldiers. No names, no photos, just the description of two snipers, one of them young, and the kind of accuracy that saved lives from over a mile away. In the corner of the article, a quiet footnote read, "There are still shadows that protect, and choose not to be seen." On a hilltop, one morning, the girl adjusts the scope on a new rifle. Her grandfather, now quieter, simply observes. She breathes steady, aims at a steel plate 900 meters away. Fires. The bullet slices through the air and hits dead center. He gives a small smile. "You're getting better than me." She wipes sweat from her brow and replies, "Not yet, but I'm close." What they don't know is that nearby, inside a tinted car, someone is watching through binoculars, marking down coordinates. Not to attack, but to understand, to study. Because now, they weren't just observers anymore. They were part of something bigger. If you're drawn to stories of real heroes, men and women who inspire through quiet actions and true courage, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Your comment is always welcome, whether it's praise, critique, or a suggestion for improvement. That kind of feedback helps us grow with every video. And now, check out the next story waiting for you on screen. It's one you don't want to miss. And tell us, would you be able to keep your aim steady when the real world depends on it? Let us know in the comments.